Greetings. Glory to God in the highest, and on earth, peace to people of good will. So, as some know, the end of the Septuagint version of the book of Job says that Job was a patrilineal descendant of Esau. Now, for most folks, that's little more than just an interesting bit of trivia, not really a major issue either way. But around 13 to 14 years ago, some were pressing, specifically One West Hebrew Israelites, and even more specifically GMS, on that point, on the point that the Septuagint says that Job descended from Esau. And that was happening because One West Israelites, and including GMS, they represent a relatively unique combination of regularly polemicizing against presumed descendants of Esau on the one hand, and affirming the Septuagint on the other. Now, admittedly, their affirmation of the Septuagint is more unconscious and unwitting insofar that they affirm the quote-unquote Apocrypha without knowing the sources of those texts, but nonetheless, that amounts to a de facto endorsement of the Septuagint. And when they were confronted on what the Septuagint says about Job, they responded by attacking the Septuagint. But beyond that, putting aside that rather gross inconsistency, they also tried to make a case for Job being an Israelite. And they argued that he descended specifically through the tribe of Issachar. And they based this on Genesis 46:13. Now, that was years ago, but not too long ago on Facebook, the topic came up again. And it was noted that another partially Septuagint-affirming Israelite group has the same issue, right? Now, admittedly, this is an obscure group, but nonetheless, that group too apparently taught that Job was from the tribe of Issachar. So I figured it might be worthwhile to have a very quick video, a very brief video, which addresses this subject, as honestly, you never know who else might take this position in the future. So jumping right in, the basic argument is that in specifically the King James Version of Genesis 46:13, one finds a reference to a person named Job who descends from Issachar. And this is supposed to prove that the Job of the book of Job cannot therefore be a descendant of Esau. Now, the first point of concern is that the Masoretic text spells that name in Genesis differently from how the name of the central person in the book of Job is spelled. In this verse in Genesis, the name is spelled Yod-Wah-Bet, while in the book of Job, the central figure of the book has a name which is spelled Aleph Yod-Wah-Bet. But that aside, a second point of concern is that there is a parallel verse in 1 Chronicles 7:1, which is to say that 1 Chronicles 7:1 parallels the verse in Genesis. And even in the King James Version, that verse in 1 Chronicles has the name Jashub rather than Job, which raises questions like what's going on here. And really quickly, since I mentioned the Hebrew text, the Masoretic text, it's worth noting that while Genesis, as was just noted, spells the relevant name Yod-Wah-Bet, this verse in 1 Chronicles has Yashib, Yod-Shin, Yod-Bet. But for this latter verse in 1 Chronicles, the Hebrew text will also have a marginal note clarifying that this should be read as Yashub with a Wah, Yod-Shin, Wah-Bet. And that view is actually quite ancient, as it's also reflected in the Septuagint, which has Yasub in both verses. And that, I think, offers the clarification of what's going on here. The King James text is based on the Masoretic text, which has certain scribal variants, which at the very least require a bit more thought, a bit more investigation. It would seem Genesis is not referring to the same person as the book of Job. Rather, Genesis is referring to a person named Yashub. And so in the end, we can conclude that the book of Genesis does not actually contradict the ending of the Septuagint version of the book of Job. And therefore, the question of Job's ancestry remains an open one, at least for those who reject the Septuagint reading. And for those who affirm the quote-unquote Apocrypha, there are going to be questions of consistency and on what grounds they reject that part of the Septuagint while affirming others. Food for thought. But on that note, I'll close this video here. God bless.